Here this afternoon. Before we begin, just a couple of quick announcements of some upcoming events here at McIntyre's. Starting with, if I can get it right, next Saturday, the 22nd at 2 p.m., we have two authors coming. We have Debbie Moose here for her book, Southern Holidays, and April McGregor will be here for her book, Sweet Potatoes. And this is all part of the UNC Southern Cooking series that they've been doing for the last year or so. So please come out if you can for that. And then at 2 o'clock next Sunday, November 23rd, we have Sherry Castle here for her latest book, The Southern Living Community Cookbook. So please come out for that. There will probably be samples at each one of them if there's any left before it starts, because I'm not having lunch. You all will be welcome to. Today, though, very happy to have with us Bruce Mclaren for his book, The Plains of Dead Cities, A Syrian Tale. This is a book that Bruce came in and showed to me, and I'm the buyer for the bookstore. I've gotten rather jaded over the years, and anybody who comes in and just stops and talks, I'm sometimes looking around a lot, because usually we're pretty crowded and things are happening. But Bruce started talking about his book, and I just started listening to him and going, this is fascinating. You know, he was an archaeologist, spent a couple of decades in Syria, saw the growing tensions. He saw the directions that things were going in. His study of history showing him the backgrounds of all of this. And he just sold me on this book to the point where it's like, hey, Bruce, you want to do an event? And we were able to work it out, and he's here today. So I would just like to say thank you, Bruce, for coming in. Thank you for showing me this book, and it's a great pleasure to have you here. Please welcome Bruce.
Thanks, Pete. And thank you everyone for turning up. I know it's a nice warm sunny day out there. You could all be at the beach, and you came here instead, so I'm touched. My name's Bruce Mclaren. I'm here to talk about my book, The Plain of Dead Cities, A Syrian Tale. The Plain of Dead Cities, if I can just draw your attention to this map of Syria over here. This is Syria. It's not the best map in the world, but this is Syria like there. The Plain of Dead Cities is actually a real place. It's located up here in this part of the country just to the west of Aleppo, and it has that name because in this region you have in excess of 700 or so abandoned settlements that all date to the Byzantine period, about 1,500 years ago. And the reason why it's particularly interesting is with the arrival of Islam in the 7th century, all of these settlements were abandoned. They were completely abandoned, and they were never re-inhabited. So for the last 1,300 years, they've just stood there dormant. But during the Byzantine period, it was a wealthy area, so the buildings were well constructed, they used stone, and the state of preservation is very good. So what we really have is sort of like a time capsule of what life was like in the Byzantine period. And as a result, the United Nations has placed the Plain of Dead Cities on their World Heritage List. There's a bit of an ironic subtext going on in the title, and that is what we're seeing now with the current conflict in Syria. Refugees from Aleppo and this sort of region, they're trying to flee the carnage, and they're actually going into the Plain of Dead Cities, and they're starting to re-inhabit these long abandoned dwellings after all this time. At the same time, the major living cities of Syria, like Aleppo, are being steadily devastated, and you sort of have to ask yourself the question, can cities which are 50% flattened bounce back? Or are we actually witnessing the death throes of some of the modern cities of Syria? Well, enough about the title. As you can tell by my accent, I'm not from here. And if you're in the audience wondering what you're doing in North Carolina listening to an Australian tell you about Syria, the long and the short of it is my background's in archaeology. I used to work at the University of Sydney, and we used to run a lot of projects out in Jordan and in the Middle East and in Central Asia. And in Central Asia I met my wife, Cynthia, and she brought me over here and we got married right here in Farrington, as it happens, back in 2001. And we stayed, so that's why I'm here. Like I said, my background's in archaeology. I used to work at the University of Sydney in the Middle Eastern Archaeology Department, and I received a PhD for work that I undertook in Jordan on military architecture. And you can see from the map, Jordan is right here, and I was working right down here, and so it was a bit of a no-brainer to not try and at least to get into Syria. And I did receive a scholarship at another time, which took me around this part of Syria in detail. That was like an archaeological survey. So what we would often do when we would go to Jordan, we'd excavate for a few months as a team, and then we'd take a break and we'd travel around and look at antiquities. And Syria is absolutely full of antiquities, so it was one of the first places I wanted to go to.